Here's a fantasy novel that may be a little less familiar to many readers, but remains one of the finest and funniest pieces of fantasy writing published in the last 100 years. It's The Unfortunate FURSEY by the Irish writer Mervyn Wall, who wrote it while recovering from a serious illness at his mother's house in Dublin, inspired in part by a book about ghosts and witchcraft that his sister borrowed for him from the local library to keep him amused. The Unfortunate FURSEY, published in 1946, is unusual in a lot of ways, but not least because it was one of the few works of fantasy published in Ireland during that period, as genre literature of all kinds, whether crime, horror, science fiction or fantasy, had a pretty rough time of it in Ireland during the 20th century. It wasn't really considered proper literature, no matter, as in the case of FURSEY, how well written or imaginative it was, or indeed how much it drew on Irish myths and legends, because it's hard to conceive of a more Irish novel than The Unfortunate FURSEY. It's the story of FURSEY, a lay brother in the medieval Irish monastery of Clonmacnoise, which was a real monastery that was abandoned in the 13th century, although the ruins can still be visited today. In The Unfortunate FURSEY, the reason for its abandonment, it is suggested, is that the monastery was attacked by the forces of evil, and the task of reciting the ritual of exorcism was entrusted, perhaps unwisely, to Brother FURSEY. I say unwisely because despite his best efforts, and hampered by an unfortunate stammer brought on by fear, FURSEY fails to perform the ritual correctly and is thrown out of the monastery for his troubles. To add to his burdens, he does not leave alone, but is accompanied by all manner of monsters and demons, and possibly most worryingly, at least initially, by the devil himself. But actually, the devil turns out to be the individual most sympathetic to FURSEY's difficulties. Where there's life, there's hope, the devil assures him at one point. And if he does try to convince FURSEY to sell him his soul, he at least agrees not to haggle over the price. The devil, it seems, is a gentleman, or more of a gentleman than the priests, monks and people in power that FURSEY also encounters. In that way, The Unfortunate FURSEY is a satire of authority. Here's another writer who understands, like Terry Pratchett, that being funny doesn't mean you're not serious. But it can just as easily be read and enjoyed as one of the crowning glories of fantasy writing in the 20th century. Part of a noble Irish tradition that begins with Gulliver's Travels in the 18th century, proceeds with Dracula in the 19th, and continues to this day. I'm one small part of it, and I'd like to think that Mervyn Wall might have been pleased.